Digging Deeper with At the Coalface, the podcast that shares the incredible stories of the talented and passionate people in our industry who not only shine on site but are doing incredible things in their local communities, on the national stage, and sometimes even making a global impact. We often interview people and would love to share the whole story with you. So here it is. This episode of Digging Deeper with At the Coalface, thanks to Australian and family-owned business Expressway Spares, proudly celebrating 60 years of supplying Hitachi and Caterpillar components to the mining industry, and your host, Jessica Rouse.
Is exciting. Welcome to Digging Deeper with At the Coalface. It's a podcast with everything you love about the magazine, just in podcast form. There have been so many times where we wish we could have shared the full interview or a chat we've had with some pretty awesome miners, some community champions, and some all-round funny people with some stories that we just couldn't put into print. But for our very first episode, I thought we'd bring together two people who not only feature in every edition of At the Coalface, but are also two very important players in both the Queensland and the New South Wales mining industries. We have Queensland Resources Council CEO Janette Hewson, and of course New South Wales Minerals Council CEO Stephen Galilee. Guys, welcome.
Hello, Jess. It's great to be on your program.
The inaugural
Thanks,
episode.
Jess.
Indeed.
How exciting. Now, you're both obviously a wealth of knowledge. You've been around the industry for decades, not to make anyone sound old. But, Steve, I want to start with you. You took on the role a while ago now, and when you did take on the role, the landscape obviously very, very different to what it looks like now in New South Wales.
Yes, Jess, thanks for reminding me how long I've been in this job. This is my 14th year in the job, 14 years. So things have changed a lot in that time. 2012 I started. There were 60 operating coal mines in New South Wales and around 10 operating metals mines. And over that time, that's changed. We now have just over 40 operating coal mines right now, with the Dartbrook mine recently recommencing operations, which was great. And we have 17 or 18 metals mines operating in New South Wales. So the profile of the industry has changed. But while the number of coal mines in New South Wales has fallen from 60 to 40, our export volumes have been very steady. They've maintained pretty much the same level across that period of time. And the number of people working in the coal industry in New South Wales, it's had its ups and downs, but it's now back to where it was in 2012 in terms of actual people mining coal in New South Wales. So that's a good indication of the productivity of the industry. And also our smaller footprint is good too in terms of community impacts and environmental impacts. But that very important export income that we're earning for New South Wales, and the jobs and the wages and the salaries and the business supply purchases across the state, they're at very high levels right now. So the industry it continues to go from strength to strength.
Yeah, definitely. And Janette, you haven't been in the role with QRC for too long, certainly not as long as Steve has been in his role, but you've been around the industry for many, many years. Have you seen a lot of change from your perspective as well?
So I'm coming up to my first year with QRC, but I've been in and working with industry for my 30 years career. So I'm up to 30 years this year. And I've seen a lot of change. I've seen a lot of positive change. And I've seen a lot of growth as well in the sector in Queensland. And I've worked elsewhere in Australia and with some global operations as well. So Queensland's industry continues to be strong, but obviously there's some headwinds that we face. And we're working our way through those and hoping to be able to make sure that Queensland can continue to be that powerhouse of mining, particularly coal mining for Australia.
Definitely. Now, as you know, you've both alluded to, there are an awful lot of people who do work in the mining industry across New South Wales and Queensland. There's also an awful lot of people who don't, and that can mean, often the perception of the mining industry, or, there's always people's thoughts and opinions floating around that may not actually be true. And I'm sure that over the years, quite a few things have pissed both of you off about what has been said about the industry, or something to do with coal mining in particular. Steve, you've narrowed down your list, but we know you could talk. I'm sure a lot of things have pissed you off over the years.
Well, 14 years enables me to list a lot of grievances, Jess. But I'm not a grievance guy. I have narrowed
sure?
my list. Well, if I was a grievance guy, I would not be here for 14 years.
True.
But I've narrowed my list of what pisses me off, I guess, if you wanted to say that, down to a top 5. And I can run through them all very quickly if you like. And some of those relate to what you were just talking about. Look, the first one in particular is this use of the term community by bureaucrats. I can't tell you how many meetings I've gone into over the years where the bureaucrats are sitting across the table, often, young folk with little life experience working on very detailed policy issues that are going to impact our industry and the people that work in it. They use the term community. They say, well, the industry thinks this and the community thinks this. And I've had to say to them so many times, look, the people that work in our industry are part of those communities, particularly in New South Wales.
Yeah.
As you know, Jess, up in the Hunter, the people that work in our industry, they live in those communities nearby. So bureaucrats sitting in their shiny offices in Sydney telling me that I have a different view to the people in those communities because I'm representing our industry, that pisses me off. That's number one. The second one I've got listed, and with apologies to Janette, is this perception that the mining states of Australia are Queensland and West Australia. New South Wales is the original mining state. The gold rushes started here. Broken Hill, the birthplace, spiritual birthplace of the mining industry, of BHP, of Rio Tinto's first presence in Australia, and more than a dozen other mining companies during the time. That's in New South Wales. We've got the thermal coal export market volumes through the port of Newcastle, generating all that export income. And while it's going to change over time, most of the thermal coal that's being used to power the east coast of New South Wales, with the exception of some that comes out of the Queensland coalfields into their power stations up there, comes out of the Hunter mostly. So we are a mining state as well. We're the original mining state, and I like to remind people of that as much as I can. So that's number 2, Jess. Number 3.
Sounds like state of origin, Steve.
Well, look, I like to see the whole country as a mining powerhouse.
Yeah,
and of course, WA has its rich deposits of iron ore. But as you know, Janette, you can't do anything with iron ore unless you've got coking coal, right? Mainly out of Queensland, but also out of the Illawarra as well. And we've got our coal exports, which from time to time are more valuable for the country in total out of our 2 states than the iron ore export values too. And if we're not first, we generally come a pretty close second. So let's have a very powerful set of mining states, but let's make sure New South Wales is remembered as one of them. So number 3 for me is the hypocrisy of some of the activists that I've dealt with over the years, particularly Lock the Gate. Lock the Gate, they say they want to protect farmers' rights and encourage them originally to lock the gate against mining and gas exploration. But where are they when the same farmers don't want wind farms and solar farms nearby their properties? Exactly. Where are they then encouraging people to lock the gates to those sorts of developments? If they truly are the farmer's friend, they would stand shoulder to shoulder with farmers and landholders on any development, and not just say that they're the farmer's friend when it suits their agenda. And they also are very hypocritical in relation to things like the development of renewables in China. China's developing renewables very fast, and that's often held up by these activists as some great thing, but they just curiously ignore the fact that China produces half the world's coal. It uses half the world's coal. It's got half the world's coal-fired power stations, and it's building more. So hypocrisy of the activists I find very annoying, sometimes quite entertaining, but usually very annoying. My second last one, Jess, it relates to some of these activists, is how they use the word transition to scare people in mining communities. And look, their agenda is to use the so-called transition that is underway, and there is a transition underway in different stages in different parts of our state, but they want to use it as a Trojan horse to disrupt supply of coal to export markets. They use this term transition as a way to get the governments that they're talking to shut down mines more quickly than they need to not approve extensions and expansions of existing operations, and to disrupt supply, rather than what the transition should be, and that is a sensible, logical, staged response to changes to global demand over time, not disruptions to supply. If the demand is there, we should be able to supply it. So that's something that annoys me. And the final one is probably less of a piss me off thing, but more just a bit of frustration. And Janette may have experienced this too. And I should mention, Janette was on our board in the New South Wales Minerals Council a few years ago in our executive committee. So she's far more experienced across these two states than I am, is when I hear people in the industry, particularly people that aren't members of the Minerals Council, say, oh, the industry just needs to tell its story. We need to do more to tell our story. We do that. We spend millions of dollars a year doing that. We invest in lots of things at grassroots level, like the Upper Hunter Mining Dialogue that you're familiar with, Jess, and careers dinners and events that we do across the state, but also our advertising across mainstream media, social media, TV, radio, catch-up TV. And I can tell you, Jess, from the research that we do twice a year across the state, a deep dive into community perceptions of our industry in New South Wales, we've got the highest level of support for mining in New South Wales now than we've had in a decade. It's nearly 70% support across the New South Wales community for mining, and the lowest level of opposition. It's in the low 20s. So more than 3 times as many people in our state support the industry than oppose it. Now, that to me sounds like the industry, at least from my perspective, is doing a reasonably good job telling our story. There's no silver bullet in relation to these sorts of things. There's no zinger or one-liner or killer fact that's going to convince people who don't like mining to switch automatically. It's something that has to be done over time. But we do invest in those things. We tell our story. We spend member money on it. It's the biggest part of our budget. And we know that it is delivering results. So, look, people should want us to tell our story, but I would just like people who think we need to understand that we are doing that. We'd like to do more. And if they want to donate to our campaign so we can do more, we're very happy to accept any contributions that they wish to make, because advertising isn't cheap.
No, it's not.
That's my list. It's not. That's right, Jess, as you know. So that's my list of 5 for this week. And it may change next week depending on how things go. But that's it for me, Jess.
Oh, I completely agree. Oh, sorry, Janette.
Sorry, Jess. I was just going to reinforce what Steve says. I liken it to the activists have a loud megaphone, and it's a small group in the community as a whole, but they have a very, very loud voice. And that loud voice is because they use ways of communicating through social media to create, I suppose, an even louder voice, which isn't really shared by most people. And importantly, our industry, we have to work with facts. We have to tell the truth. And it's not a level playing field when it comes to activism. There's a lot of mistruths that are out there.
Yes.
And our industry, as Steve said, we have been, really working hard to dispel those myths. And it is working. Like our research is pretty similar to Steve's. 69% of Queenslanders have agreed that mining is extremely or very important to them across Queensland. And that's up from 10% from the previous year. And again, that's through being loud advocates for the industry, through the advertising we did, particularly on coal royalties in Queensland and the need for a better regime. So all these things we're doing, and we're working hard, and our members are working hard, as are their workforces. To, convey the truth.
Exactly. And I mean, I couldn't agree more with you, Steve, with the 5 things that frustrate you the most. I mean, I'm a journalist, obviously, in our mining region, but I live here in the community as well. And when I see activists, stopping passenger trains, for instance, just one example, that frustrates me more than anything. And I feel like most people are the same. We're frustrated. We don't care about whatever message they're trying to come across. My day's been disrupted because I can't catch a train into Newcastle, So it's baffling that they don't see that side of it or don't want to, I guess.
Well, I think a lot of those activities are designed to attract social media attention, not just here, but internationally. I mean, we saw that with the Newcastle port blockade over the last few years that they have annually in November. And some of the evidence that were given by the organisers of that event in court when the police and the New South Wales government sought to restrict the disruptions by withdrawing, some of the permitting that they were seeking, the activists were seeking. We saw that a lot of the evidence they were providing was that the activists were providing in court was basically saying, look, we do this to trigger mass arrests because otherwise we're not going to get the media attention that we're seeking here and globally. So I don't think, Jess, that they care about the disruptions to local people like yourself on those train lines. And what we saw in the middle of last year, nearly 900 passenger services disrupted in July when Blockade Australia are undertaking some of their activities at that stage. I don't think they care about that. That's not on their agenda. What's on their agenda is, as Janette said, making it seem as though they have more members than they do, generating a presence beyond the actual size of their organisation, and giving the impression to governments and to decision makers in government that they're speaking for people that they actually don't speak for.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And Jess, that's the work that Steve and I do, which is we get out there with government, whether it's politicians in government, in the opposition, crossbenchers, with the bureaucrats too who run departments that affect our industry. And we give them the facts about the support that we do have in the community and our states generally about this, because I think it's a really important message for them to hear.
Yeah, definitely. And I think another thing that I'm sure would be on Steve's extended list of frustrations, but is certainly on mine, is a lack of education, Janette, in communities about the mining industry and what it actually does. We know the QRC is doing a lot of work in that space to educate about the industry.
Absolutely. And I think in Queensland, like 1 in every $4 of the Queensland economy comes down to resources. So that's mining, that's gas, and 70% of that is coal. So it's a really big number. And 1 in every 6 jobs relates to our industry. So that's really important because it's about the fact that, we employ over 62,000 people directly in mining companies, but also, there's over 550,000 Queenslanders who have a job because of the sector. And that's all those local suppliers, it's the met sector, it's everyone who contributes to what we need to do to keep operating. So people in the regions in Queensland really understand that and they see us up close. We partner with those regional communities. It's really the work we have to do in urban places like Southeast Queensland and Brisbane to really explain to people who don't see it every day. They're not out at the airport Monday morning at 6 a.m. Trying to catch a flight and seeing thousands of people in their high vis who are flying out to the Queensland regions to work in our mines. So we really need to explain that well. And one of the areas we've focused on for the past 20 years as QRC is actually getting out into schools and showing students that STEM, so science and technology and maths, what are the opportunities for them to bring those subjects to life? And importantly, to open their eyes to the fact that they can have a wonderful career in mining, whether it's in a trade or whether it's going on to university to be engineers or environmental scientists or surveyors, the people and the skills that we need. And that's been a really important tool for us in helping to explain and bring our industry to schools where they may not actually see, what's out there. And we've had really great success. We reach about 6,300 students in 100 schools across Queensland. So we're really excited. And the new Queensland government's given us $2 million to help us set up regional hubs in those Queensland mining communities to actually extend that program because they see great value in it as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. And we see similar things in New South Wales, Steve. We see the mining dialogue doing all of those school tours throughout the year, really opening the kids up to what the industry has to offer.
Yes, that's right, Jess. As well as the school mine tours in the Hunter, we for some years now have had a program called Prime. It's Pathways to Resource, Industry and Mining Employment. which uses virtual reality sets as a way to engage with students and careers advisors in a range of high schools, not just across the Hunter, but more broadly across particularly mining regions, but more and more so in the western suburbs of Sydney.
Oh, cool.
We do a series of careers dinners. We've done those now for 3 or 4 years, where we go to 3 or 4 different mining region centres like Singleton, Newcastle, Wollongong, Orange. We've been to Dubbo. I think we're going to Parks in a few weeks' time.
Yeah.
And we engage directly with the teachers, the students, the parents and the careers advisors. We take local mining companies and some of the universities and other tertiary institutions as well, and give people a chance to talk face-to-face about what career opportunities are there with parents and their kids. So they can make informed decisions about, what's on offer, and they have proven to be extremely popular. We probably engage with thousands of people each year in total through those careers initiatives too. So our program's not as extensive as Janette's. They've got a fantastic program up there in Queensland, which is well established. But we are seeing good results, particularly a very strong uptick in the enrolment of students in mining engineering courses at the University of New South Wales and the University of Wollongong, which is encouraging given that those numbers were pretty low just a few years ago. And we think part of that is attributed to the work we're doing on the ground, like Janette's doing. Just not to necessarily push a strong agenda, more about putting information in front of parents, careers advisors and students that they may not have been aware of, so they can make decisions on their career prospects in the most informed way possible.
It seems like across both states, that's certainly something that has increased over the years. I mean, when I was at school, which wasn't all too long ago, I don't remember any careers advisor or anyone walking into the school to even utter the word mining or coal or that industry at all.
It is something we've focused on over the last 4 or 5 years in a much bigger way, and companies themselves on the ground do their own things too, but we're able to coordinate some of our initiatives across our member companies to complement what the companies are already doing on the ground as well.
Yeah. Now, Janette, what else frustrates you about the industry, a perception or something you've come across over the years?
I think it's the fact that, as the noisy minority have been able to get out there and say that coal's dead. It's not.
No.
As Steve knows really, really well, the demand for Australian coal, whether it's coming from Queensland or New South Wales, is huge. And we expect that to go for decades. And it's coal for energy. It's coal for making steel. These are all things we rely on for a modern life. And as Steve said, activists just can conveniently disregard the fact that everything that they enjoy in life is brought, to them because of mining. And we've really got to continue to, communicate that, and we do. And I know Steve does it really well down in New South Wales. And it's really just explaining that we can't have a modern way of life that we enjoy here in Australia without having our industry. And everyone benefits. And there's been a lot of talk about, mining, all this money goes offshore to these big multinationals. Well, that's actually, that's not right. A lot of these companies are Australian listed. A lot of them are Australian owned. And as people who have superannuation invested, you'll find that most of your super, would include interests in these mining companies that we have here in Australia. So all Australians benefit, whether it's through your super funds, with your own, wealth creation, whether it's, all the jobs that we support directly and indirectly and allow people to earn great livings and be able to support their families, especially in cost of living crisis. How important is that?
Yeah.
The 17,000 Queensland suppliers that our industry, buys from, we're keeping those people employed. We're helping them, manage their families' finances and look after their families. We put the police on the streets. We provide for the hospitals and the teachers and the schools and the roads through royalties. Last year we contributed something like $13 billion to Queensland's budget.
Yeah.
That's, when you take away what the Queensland government gets from, the federal government for GST and federal money, we're contributing, over a quarter of the Queensland budget. That's a big number.
Exactly.
So everyone benefits from mining. And I know, Steve, that's a message too that, in New South Wales, you've been communicating as well for years.
Yes, absolutely. Fortunately, we don't pay as high a royalty rate in New South Wales
No.
as you do in Queensland.
So you win
Anyone
the state of origin game on that one, Steve.
Yeah.
We'd like to win that one back.
Yeah, no, that's okay. With nothing wrong with a bit of healthy competition on that. Hopefully, in relation to who can be the lowest rather than who can be the highest. Look, Janette's absolutely right, and it's the same for New South Wales. We contribute a significant amount in royalties. In the Hunter, the coal industry is 25% of that region's economy. You can't take away $1 in $4 in a regional economy and expect there to be no impact. There's over 7,000 supplier businesses across the state who are part of the mining supply chain in one form or another. And while our royalties are lower than they are in Queensland, we're still paying higher royalties than we used to because the royalties did go up a few years ago. So we're making that sort of contribution as well, not on the same scale as in Queensland, but still very significant over the forward estimates, close to 14 billion. So it is an important source of revenue that funds all those things that Janette mentioned. Look, I get the impression from talking. I've been in this job. I think I've dealt with 6 or 7 premiers, 6 or 7 treasurers, 7 or 8 resources ministers, and so on and so forth. Usually, what happens in my experience is that once oppositions get into government and need to actually make things work and pay for things, their attitude usually changes to something that's a bit more responsible, and they understand the importance of that revenue, especially if you're a treasurer trying to balance the budget or inheriting, as was the case here and in Queensland, treasurers come in inheriting big budget deficits that they need to sort out. So our engagement with government on those issues has generally been pretty positive, and I would imagine Janette's facing some of those challenges as well, with the new government in Queensland facing some very difficult budget issues.
That's right, Steve, and we understand that coal is in the ground and it's owned by Queenslanders, so Queenslanders deserve to get a share of that. But companies put a lot of money in to develop those mines, and if they didn't, it would stay in the ground. So we're all about how do we grow the pie for Queensland government in terms of how do we bring on more investment, more tonnes, more royalties, rather than, I suppose, damaging current owners who are shouldering a big burden. And probably the other thing, Jess, in terms of, our pet peeves, it takes between, anywhere up to 15 years to get a mine going from exploration to production in Queensland. And frankly, that's not good enough. I know because I've been in the industry for 30 years. When I first started, it would take a few years. And we would still go through a lot of rigor. We'd make sure that all the science was there. We'd go through community consultation, but we've lost our way over the past 10 years. And there's a lot of green tape, red tape, a lot of duplication in terms of, how many times do we have to say the same thing and prove this and get the approvals that we need. So we've given the Queensland government, when they came into power last year, a report which says, here's all the things that you can do to make it better. How do we get the right balance so that communities have absolute confidence that government's regulating well and strongly, making sure that impacts are managed, but actually doing it in a way that gets production going faster? Because if it's faster, that means more jobs, more local suppliers benefiting, more money coming to the government in that bigger pool of royalties. So we're really excited to be working with the new government on that, and it's showing really positive signs that they want to help fix that. But that's what we need to do, because otherwise countries elsewhere are just going to, mine those commodities, mine the coal or copper or whatever it is, and get the benefit of it. So
Exactly.
we've got to be really realistic as a country and strike the right balance.
That's right. That was going to be my next point, actually. The approvals process in both states is certainly something that has the potential to slow the industry right down.
Well, we're seeing that in New South Wales, and much of it is, there is regulatory creep across a range of different areas that we're seeing in New South Wales. I think at a high level, our state government supports the industry. They support the ongoing production of coal out of our mines and those export volumes at a high level. But too often, you see ministers who aren't aware of what's happening at levels below them within their bureaucracies, as departments and agencies are always looking for new things to do, always looking for new regulations to impose. They're not taking any away in most cases. They're adding new ones. And we're seeing that in New South Wales. I don't want to bore your listeners with too much of the detail, Jess, but in biodiversity, we're seeing it. In issues relating to climate change and emissions, we're seeing it. And the New South Wales government has moved to a review of its high-level coal strategy during the course of this year, which has created some uncertainty as well. But the big one we have seen emerge is what Janette alluded to, and that's this duplication, this increasing level of duplication between state approvals processes and federal approvals processes. We saw a gold mine in New South Wales, after receiving all its approvals through the New South Wales system over a rigorous process lasting several years, knocked back on what appeared to be a fairly dubious whim from the Federal Environment Minister this year. We've seen coal mining operation extension applications approved as far back as 2021 and 2022 by the New South Wales government, held up until just recently, again by federal government approval processes, and some issues in relation to activist interventions through the court system. And those things just cost money. They're designed to disrupt and delay the approvals processes when the activists get involved. And it has to get better. Our approvals timeframes in New South Wales were not too bad for a while. We did get some improvements back in 2020, and the system seemed to be working reasonably well. Not perfect, but reasonably well. But those factors are creating uncertainty and increased processes, requirements, delays and assessments and costs in the system, and we're starting to see those timeframes creep up again. It's something that we're engaging with our state government on. And look, ultimately, my view is the best way to manage any sort of transition that might be underway in relation to our coal sector is to keep people who are currently in coal mining jobs in those jobs for as long as possible.
Exactly.
The longer that people are in their current jobs, the easier it's going to be to manage any transition over a longer period of time, which means supporting applications for projects that want to continue and extend their operations into the future. That seems to me a no-brainer. And I suspect that what we're seeing is the impact of bureaucrats doing things without necessarily having their ministers' line of sight or visibility on what's happening on the ground, particularly in relation to biodiversity policy, where it's becoming extremely complicated, extremely bureaucratic. The rules are changing all the time, and it's very difficult right now to navigate that process, which is an integral part of the assessment system to make sure that the mines are doing the right thing.
That's right. I mean, we've seen that happen with Hunter Valley operations. It just feels like the goalpost just keeps on moving, and, they get closer to the end of one, mining lease, and they're trying to get another one, and it's just, it's crazy.
And there's a range of others as well that are they're in the system. The rules change. Some mid-level bureaucrat decides to change the rules and issue a new circular or a new guidance, and suddenly all the reports and studies that have been extensively undertaken by the company and independent experts over time become redundant and have to be redone again. That's crazy. That should not be the case. And that is not something that's just affecting our sector. I mean, that's affecting, developments right across the board. And, our state and, regional communities, whether they're in Queensland or New South Wales, can't afford those lost opportunities. As Janette said, investors are mobile. Most of our mining companies are competing for investment with places around the world who are going to do this stuff better and attract the investment that we're going to lose if we don't fix this system up.
Exactly.
And Jess, I've had, I suppose most of my jobs have been about project approvals. So I've got personal scars where these projects have been held up. And it's really important to remember that most of these projects never get knocked back. They just go through appeal after appeal after appeal. And it's all about delaying. And that's the tactic used. And the fact that they always get approved means that they're good projects and their impacts can be managed. And I think that's really important for us all to think about when we co-design this new way with our government up here, as in let's just be sensible. Let's give people the right to be consulted, but it's not something that just goes on and on. It's almost like death by a thousand cuts.
Yeah.
And time is money when you're trying to construct something or bring something to market. And don't take the opportunity as Queensland or New South Wales. I can assure you that another country around the world will take that opportunity, take it away from Australians.
That's exactly right. And obviously we've recently had the election up in Queensland. A federal election is not too far away either. What are your thoughts on the upcoming federal election to both of you? Do you think we might see change? Do we need it?
Janette, would you like to go first, or would you like me to go first on what is a very sensitive question?
Oh, look, I think that it's going to be a close one. Yeah. And it's really hard to rely on polls because, as we know, polls in recent years don't always turn out the way we all thought it was going to be. So it's hard to gauge, but I think that we're having some decent conversations now, and it's really about making sure that, again, the Greens are obviously not supporters of our industry. And any minority government or things like that pose risks for us. So that's something obviously we're watching carefully. We do a lot of work obviously at a national level through the Minerals Council, to talk across all sides of politics. But we've got to get the basics right, not only in our states but at a federal level. So the Nature Positive Plan has to be sensible. It can't be lurching in one way and stopping development and responsible development, because that's what we do as an industry. We develop responsibly. So we've got to get this right for our states and also for the benefit of Australia, because our economy relies on resources. We're not an economy that can be propped up by people who make coffees. You need people who are earning money to be able to buy those coffees. Yeah. So it's all about how do we keep our economy healthy in all sectors. That's right. Steve, I'll hand over to you.
Yeah. Thanks, Janette. Look, Jess, we by the nature of our organisations, we have to deal with, and I enjoy dealing with in most cases, politicians from right across the parliament. It's one of the privileges of this job, from my perspective, is I get to work with great people regardless of their political affiliations. And most people in politics are in it for the right reasons, which is good as well. But I do think that there is this is going to be a very close federal election, and we may be in a situation after the election where both of the major parties, if you refer to the coalition as a party, like the Labor Party, could have a very similar number of seats in the parliament, but both be a few seats short. And it will depend upon what the crossbench looks like, how many independents and Greens are in the lower house, and the nature and background of those independents as to who forms government if one or the other side can't form a majority. It is going to be close. I don't think it's a done deal that we'll have a whole lot of Teals and Greens on the crossbench and not many others. We have seen over the years. Other types of independents on the crossbench. Bob Catter's there, obviously, from Queensland. Di Lee's there from Western Sydney. And we've had others over the years. So it is possible that either side could potentially form a majority or a minority government without needing to rely on the Greens or the Teals. Whether or not there is a change of government, what needs to happen after the election in many of these policy areas is a change of policy.
Yeah.
I mean, we can't have what we've seen over the last few years or so, where, from my perspective, without being too political, it has felt as though there have been times when the federal Labor government has been out to get the sector on a range of different policy areas, whether it be the nature positive reforms, whether it be on industrial relations, whether it be on climate change and emissions, or just the general posture and tone on how they talk about the resources sector, including gas and coal, but also the lip service that seems to be paid to metals and critical minerals development too. It does feel that sometimes the government has been out to get us at that national level. So there is an opportunity for people in mining communities, especially coal mining communities, to think about that. We've got some great local federal MPs representing mining communities in New South Wales. People like Meryl Swanson and Dan Repicoli, for example, they're fantastic representatives for their local communities. But in the end, people are going to have to wonder to themselves, which side of politics, which party do they, in their gut, in their heart, think is going to be the most supportive of the sector in which they work in. But which party, which side of politics is going to support the ongoing actions, operation and presence of our sector into the future and make their own mind up. But I can tell you absolutely, Jess, one factor that needs to be taken into account in relation to those deliberations, I would very strongly suggest and respectfully suggest, is whether or not there are preference deals with the Greens involved.
Yes.
And whether or not the policy positions of the major parties are lining up in one way or another with the Greens, because we need a change of policy positions on a range of different fronts after the election, not just for our industry's sake, but for the nation's sake, for the economy's sake. We can't continue pursuing this public spending, public sector driven economy, because we'll end up going broke as a nation. We need that private sector investment, that capital investment, that large scale private sector economic activity that's ultimately going to organically ensure that our economy can prosper. And that needs to be taken into account, in my view. We can't have policy changes that are going to be worse, and that will happen if we see a minority government with the Greens involved, or at least wielding influence in some form or another after the election.
Yeah, I feel like at the very least, an election provides both yourself and Janette and the industry with that opportunity to have conversations about the industry that perhaps we may not usually. So at least that's something.
Well, it's the one day every 3 years where the politicians don't rule us, we rule them.
Exactly. We hold all the cards.
All the voters get their say. And the voters are the ones in charge on that one day every 3 years or so.
That's it.
A magical day.
Exactly. And I reckon on that, we leave everyone just thinking about that. And thank you so much for joining us, both of you, Steve and Janette, for the inaugural Digging Deeper with the Coalface podcast. We hope to have you on again.
My
that
pleasure.
would be great, Jess.
Thank you, Jess. Thanks for your support for the industry.
Well, there it is, the very first episode of Digging Deeper with At the Coalface. I hope you enjoyed it. Of course, you'll be able to download it. Well, if you're listening, you probably already have on all of your favourite streaming services, whether that's Spotify or through Apple Podcast. It's at our website as well. Make sure you give us a follow on all of our socials, Facebook, Instagram and LinkedIn. We'll keep you up to date with everything that's going on with At the Coalface. I'm Jessica Rouse. It's been awesome putting together our very first podcast episode, and we can't wait to bring you another one, Digging Deeper with At the Coalface.